For centuries, historians tried to bury this story. Court scholars erased names, burned files, and rewrote entire chapters of Tang Dynasty history. But no matter how hard they tried, one truth kept resurfacing, a truth so scandalous, so politically dangerous that even in modern China, it remains spoken only in whispers. Wu Zetian, the only female emperor in Chinese history, created the first and only male harem the empire had ever seen. Not a rumor, not a legend. Documented system. When most people think of imperial harems, they imagine thousands of women hidden behind silk screens, waiting to serve a male emperor. But when Wu Zetian seized the dragon throne, she flipped that world upside down. She didn't just break the rules, she rewrote them. The woman who rose from a low-ranking concubine to the most powerful ruler on earth decided she would have what no woman before her had ever dared to claim: a palace full of beautiful, obedient young men selected solely for her pleasure, companionship, and political control. But this system did not appear suddenly. It began quietly, almost invisibly. At first, attendants noticed new faces inside the palace: handsome boys carrying scrolls, musicians who sounded too refined, attendants who walked with unusual grace. They weren't eunuchs, they weren't officials. And yet, they stayed close to the empress, closer than anyone else. At night, the palace corridors lit with lanterns seemed to shift. Servants whispered. Eunuchs exchanged wary glances. A new world was being built behind closed doors. Wu Zetian understood power better than any emperor before her. She knew that to survive in a government dominated by men who hated her, she needed loyalty she could control absolutely. Young men with no political family, no alliances, and no ambition beyond pleasing the empress were the perfect solution. They were her eyes, her ears, her comfort and, in many cases, her weapons. But this male harem wasn't just about desire. It was a political innovation, a weaponized institution built from necessity. Every man chosen served a specific purpose. Some entertained her, some spied for her. A few became symbols of her dominance over the old patriarchal court. And yet the true scale of this system, the secret scouting missions, the beauty inspections, the training halls, the coded rituals remained hidden from the world. For most people inside the palace, it was nothing more than a rumor. But for the men selected, it was a trap disguised as paradise. Once they entered the empress's private quarters, they were bound to her forever. There was no escape, no retirement, and no life beyond her favor. This was not a story of romance. It was a story of power. And the question everyone feared, even centuries later, was simple. Just how far did Wu Zetian go to build this secret world of male companions? The answer begins with a disturbing ritual, one that determined which men were allowed to serve her, which were never seen again. The empress never searched for her male companions herself. She didn't need to. She had an entire underground network to do it for her. Long before anyone in the palace understood what was happening, Wu Zetian had already created a hidden system of scouts, trusted agents disguised as merchants, monks, doctors, and traveling officials. Their mission was simple, but terrifying in its precision. Find the most beautiful, obedient, and healthy young men in the empire. Take them. The first step always happened far from the capital. In distant provinces Sichuan, Hunan, Shanding, villagers noticed strangers asking unusual questions. Is there a young man here with a soft voice? Does anyone know boys gifted in music or poetry? Which families have sons of rare beauty? People never understood why these questions mattered, but the scouts always knew exactly what they were looking for. They watched men in marketplaces and temples, even along rivers where farmers washed clothes. A single detail could change a life: forever smooth skin, bright eyes, elegant posture, or simply the right expression when smiling. The scouts took notes silently, never revealing their purpose. Once a promising candidate was found, the scouts approached families with a lie. Your son has been chosen for imperial service, a great honor, a guaranteed future. Most parents agreed immediately, believing their son would become a palace guard, musician, or official. They never knew he was being selected for something far more intimate, far more dangerous. When the chosen young men were taken to the capital, the truth became harder to hide. The palace gates closed behind them. Their names were recorded, their old identities stripped away. Some tried to ask questions, But the eunuchs escorting them had one answer: "You are property of the Son of Heaven now. Remember that." Inside the Forbidden City, the recruitment didn't stop. Even high-ranking courtiers secretly recommended handsome relatives in hopes of gaining favor with the Empress. The competition was vicious. A single rumor that the Empress smiled at a particular man could destroy entire political factions. The most disturbing part? Wu Zetian often never met the first wave of candidates. She trusted her scouts and inner attendants to filter hundreds down to a select few before she even saw their faces. The process became known among the palace staff as "the gentle breeze arrives," a poetic name for something far from gentle. But behind this elaborate scouting system lay a darker truth the court dared not speak. Not all men brought to the palace were kept. Many disappeared. Some were dismissed and sent to remote military posts. Some were imprisoned for knowing too much. Some were never heard from again. Because the next stage, the examination of their bodies, skills, and obedience, was far harsher than anyone outside the palace ever imagined. When the young men arrived at the inner palace, the doors did not open into luxury. They opened into silence. Cold, echoing silence. A place without windows, without sunlight. A place designed for one purpose only: to test them, to break them, to decide who was worthy of standing before Wu Zetian. This stage was never written clearly in official documents, but fragments survive, whispers recorded by frightened eunuchs, scattered notes from palace physicians, and the later confessions of attendants who survived long enough to speak. Together they reveal something chilling. The beauty examinations were more brutal than anything female concubines had ever endured. The first test was the physical inspection, not a simple check, a full, invasive assessment of the body. Palace doctors measured the young men's skin, eyes, teeth, breath, and posture. They looked for soft hands, delicate features, harmonious body proportions. Even a scar from childhood could disqualify a candidate. Some men fainted from embarrassment, others from fear. All of them understood one thing: this was no job interview. This was a judgment on their very existence.
Next came the voice test.
The Empress wanted men who could speak gently, recite poetry beautifully, and offer comfort without arrogance. Harsh or loud voice meant instant failure. The testers made the candidates read lines of famous Tang poetry, softly, elegantly. The ones who stuttered or trembled too much were removed immediately. Then came the obedience test, the part no historian dared to fully describe. The examiners pushed the men psychologically, giving impossible instructions, asking humiliating questions, and studying how quickly they submitted. The palace wanted men who could endure anything without breaking, resisting, or questioning. Because if they were to serve the Empress, they needed to be loyal, discreet, and easily controlled. Some candidates tried to rebel, some cried, some begged to go home. They were escorted away by guards and never returned. But the most secret part of the examination was the final chamber, the Hall of Quiet Fragrance. Here the young men were presented before senior palace women trusted attendants, who acted as the final gatekeepers. They examined the men not for beauty alone, but for something more dangerous. Will this man's presence comfort the Empress, or threaten her throne? The attendants observed every movement, every breath, every flicker of emotion. A man who appeared too confident was rejected. A man too nervous was dismissed. The ideal candidate needed to be soft, calm, charming yet forgettable outside the Empress's gaze. Only a handful passed each round. Those few were bathed in orchid oil, dressed in silk robes, and given new identities. They were no longer sons, brothers, or citizens. They were attendants of inner harmony, men owned by the emperor. But passing the beauty examinations did not mean safety. It meant the most dangerous stage was about to begin, the training that would erase their former selves forever. Passing the beauty examinations did not mean survival. It meant transformation, a transformation so complete that families would not have recognized their own sons if they ever saw them again. This stage, hidden deep within the inner palace, was known privately by eunuchs as the refining. Because the Empress did not simply choose men, she crafted them. The training compound was located behind the women's harem, separated by high stone walls and guarded by eunuchs who never spoke. The air smelled of incense and damp stone. The men selected for service entered through a single gate, tanned for most. That gate would never open outward again. The first part of their training focused on movement, In narrow hallways lined with mirrors, instructors corrected every gesture. Steps too wide were punished, heads held too high were struck down, expressions too bold were erased. They were taught to glide silently, to bow without trembling, and to move with a mix of humility and allure. A single clumsy motion could end their future. Next came speech lessons. The empress valued eloquence, soft tones, elegant rhythm, poetic phrasing. The men practiced speaking while holding small jade stones beneath their tongues to smooth their voices. They recited ancient verses, whispered flattery, and learned to answer questions without revealing fear or ambition. But the most grueling part of the training involved emotional discipline. The palace women who oversaw the program tested them relentlessly. Sudden insults, unexpected commands, long hours of stillness debates designed to provoke anger. Any sign of defiance was punished. Any sign of pride was crushed. The goal was horrifyingly simple: to shape them into perfect companions, gentle, loyal, and incapable of betraying the empress. There was also a cultural reason behind this harshness. Wu Zetian's enemies were everywhere: scholars, nobles, generals who whispered that a woman had no right to rule. She needed attendants who were controlled, discreet, and completely dependent on her favor. A single careless word from a male favorite could ignite rebellion. And so, their training included something even darker. Each man had to learn how to listen without reacting, how to carry secret messages, how to recognize dangerous officials, and how to remain invisible when necessary. These were not just entertainers. They were tools crafted to soothe the empress, guard her privacy, and sometimes help her manipulate the court. Days turned into weeks, then months. Their former lives faded. They no longer used their birth names. Their families were never mentioned again. The palace gave them new identities, new titles, new purposes. Only when the instructors judged a man completely refined, mind-shaped, voice softened, body perfected was he prepared for the final stage, presentation before the empress herself. In that moment, the unveiling of a newly crafted male companion was unlike anything else inside the Forbidden City. For months, the chosen men existed like shadows straining, whispering, obeying, disappearing into the inner chambers of the harem. But everything led to one moment, a moment feared and desired in equal measure. The presentation night, the night a young man would stand face to face with the most powerful woman in the world, Wu Zetian, Emperor of China. This ceremony did not follow the rituals of a typical palace audience. No officials gathered, no records were kept. No carriage wheels echoed through the palace stones. It happened in the deepest hour of the night, when the palace guards grew quiet and even the candles seemed afraid to flicker. The selected man was bathed in warm, perfumed water, draped in soft silk, and escorted by 2 senior eunuchs through corridors known only to a handful of people. These paths were so restricted that even high-ranking ministers did not know they existed. As the man walked, he passed through 3 gates: the gate of purity, the gate of harmony, and finally, the gate of radiant shadow. A name chosen specifically for the empress's private world. Inside the final chamber, everything changed. The darkness softened, incense curled like smoke rising from a hidden fire. Gold lanterns cast warm light on silk curtains embroidered with phoenixes, symbols of imperial femininity and unstoppable dominance. Here, in this silent sanctuary, Wu Zetian waited. Witness accounts are rare, but fragments exist, whispers from eunuchs who served her, hints from palace women, and bitter complaints recorded by scholars who hated her rule. They all describe the same image. She sat elevated on a low couch, her posture straight, her eyes sharp enough to slice through lies. Before speaking a word, Wu Zetian studied the man. Every detail mattered: the way he bowed, the way he breathed, the way he held fear in his chest. She searched for weakness and for usefulness. Some men fainted under her gaze. Others shook uncontrollably. A few dared to meet her eyes and, that, more than anything else, intrigued her. The empress did not demand perfection. She demanded potential. If a man pleased her, she might ask him to speak. And his voice, shaped by months of training, would float softly through the chamber, reciting a poem or offering gentle compliments. Wu Zetian watched not his words, but his reactions. Did he tremble? He hide ambition? Did he mask arrogance as charm? Her decision was swift. A simple nod meant acceptance. The man would remain in her inner circle, sometimes rising to incredible power overnight. A neutral face meant he would be dismissed discreetly, reassigned to distant palace duties. Cold stare meant danger. Because those who displeased the empress were not simply rejected. Some were stripped of their new identities and quietly removed, sent to remote posts, imprisoned, or erased entirely from palace records. The presentation night was therefore not a moment of glory. It was a test of survival, a judgment, a gamble with no second chance. For the men who passed, a new life began, one filled with influence, fear, luxury, and constant danger, because becoming a favorite of Wu Zetian didn't mean protection. It meant stepping into the most politically lethal position in the empire. By the time Wu Zetian entered her 70s, most of the early male attendants had already faded from her inner circle, some quietly dismissed. Some reassigned, some vanished without a trace. But then came the two men who would change everything. The men whose beauty would one day become a political earthquake. Zhang Yizi and Zhang Changzong, brothers barely in their 20s, and unlike anyone the palace had ever seen. Their arrival was almost accidental. Legend says the younger brother Changzong was first noticed by one of the empress' ladies-in-waiting while he was singing at a private gathering outside the palace. His voice was gentle, his face flawless, and his manner humble. She reported him immediately. Within days, both brothers were escorted into the Forbidden City. What happened next is one of the most whispered scandals in Chinese history. The empress saw them once, just once, and everything changed. Even in records written by her enemies, one detail is repeated over and over. Wu Zetian was captivated, not just impressed, captivated. It wasn't only their beauty, it was their presence, their softness, their charm, their innocence, mixed with an underlying intelligence. They bowed with grace. They spoke with perfect gentleness. They radiated the exact combination of obedience and allure the empress valued most. She welcomed them into her private chambers immediately. Within a month, their lives transformed. New silk robes, new titles, new authority. Zhang Yizi, the elder brother, became her confidant. Zhang Changzong, the younger, became her favorite companion. Rumors spread like wildfire. Ministers began noticing that their petitions were returned with changes written in a delicate, unfamiliar hand. Officials waiting outside the throne room sometimes saw one of the Zhang brothers emerge with sealed imperial orders. Generals found themselves outranked by two young men who had never set foot on a battlefield. The court was outraged. To them, these were not officials, not nobles, not scholars, just beautiful toys, or so they claimed. But they were wrong. The Zhang brothers were far from passive. They learned the rules of power quickly. They charmed the palace women, bribed key eunuchs, and formed alliances with ambitious officials. They controlled access to the empress, they manipulated messages, influenced decisions, and quietly expanded their influence into every corner of the bureaucracy by the time Wu Zetian's health began to decline. The brothers had risen to a level no male favorite had ever reached in Chinese history. For many in the court, it no longer felt like China was ruled by the empress. It felt like China was ruled by the Zhang brothers standing behind her throne, and that feeling, real or exaggerated, ignited a fury that would soon explode into a conspiracy so dangerous that it threatened not only the brothers, but Wu Zetian herself. By the winter of 704 CE, the Forbidden City felt like a battlefield disguised in silk. Officials bowed respectfully in court, but behind closed doors, their rage boiled. The Zhang brothers, two young men with no noble blood, no military experience, and no scholarly rank, had risen so high that even seasoned ministers trembled when they walked by. Oh! To the political elite, this wasn't just an insult. It was a humiliation, warning that Wu Zetian no longer needed them, and a signal that the empire's future might fall into the hands of two frivolous boys, as the angry ministers called them. Whispers of rebellion filled the corridors. Every time Zhang Yizi paused to admire a painted scroll, officials clenched their fists. Every time Zhang Changzong offered a gentle smile at court, scholars looked away in disgust. Every time one of them delivered an imperial order, generals muttered threats under their breath. The resentment grew into something darker. Some blamed the empress's old age, claiming she was blinded by affection. Others whispered that the brothers used magic, seduction, or manipulation to control her. A few dared to say what many feared. The empress is no longer ruling alone. By now, the brothers controlled access to the throne, the flow of information, palace finances, appointments of key officials, the daily rhythm of Wu Zetian's private life. They were everywhere, and the court could not tolerate it. The breaking point came when ministers noticed something alarming. The Zhang brothers were quietly positioning their own allies into powerful offices. They were building a network, one that could survive even after Wu Zetian's death. A nightmare took shape, the empire falling into the hands of two commoners. Then came the final spark. Wu Zetian fell gravely ill. Her strength wavered. She slept more. She appeared in court less. And each time word of her condition spread, the Zhang brothers tightened their grip, controlling who could see her and what messages reached her bedside. Some officials were blocked entirely from visiting her. Others were told lies about her condition. The court panicked. For the first time, powerful generals and ministers realized they might lose everything: status, influence, even the stability of the empire. The brothers continued ruling from behind the curtains. So a secret alliance formed. It included members of the old Tang royal clan, high-ranking ministers, and military commanders loyal to the crown prince. They met in abandoned chambers, spoke in coded language, and swore to keep their plan hidden, even from their families. Their goal was clear: remove the Zhang brothers by force, recover control of the empress, restore the Tang dynasty. The plot was drafted swift, violent, and absolute. All they needed was a single moment when palace guards loyal to Wu Zetian were distracted. That moment came on a cold morning in early 705 CE. History remembers Wu Zetian as the woman who broke the ultimate barrier, becoming the only female emperor of China. But fewer people understand the strange legacy she left behind. A legacy built not on battlefields or books, but on the quiet, forbidden chambers where her male harem once lived. After her death in 705 CE, the new rulers of the Tang dynasty moved quickly. They did not want the world to remember that the Holy Emperor of China had kept dozens of young men as personal attendants, companions, and rumored lovers. It was a problem that threatened the dignity of the new court and the patriarchy that had ruled China for centuries. So the first order was simple: erase the evidence. Records mentioning the talented men, Cairen, approachable attendants, Gomfum, and chamber youths, Ne Gomfum, were quietly restricted, rewritten, or destroyed. The imperial archives, which once carefully listed titles, salaries, and duties inside palace harems, suddenly skipped over those years. Memoirs written by palace women mysteriously vanished. Ministers refused to speak about the system, calling it an embarrassment unfit for the chronicle. It was not just about shame, it was fear. Wu Zetian as male harem proved that power did not have to stay in the hands of men, and that alone was enough to terrify the generations that came after her. Yet, despite the cover-up, some truths survived, hidden in poems, secret letters, and scattered references. Enough for historians to reconstruct the outlines of a system that was completely unique in Chinese history. Men selected for beauty, grace, and youth eunuchs assigned to oversee them and prevent palace intrigues, strict rules forbidding political influence, ceremonies regulating their appearance, conduct, and access to the emperor, quiet examinations to test not intellect, but physical refinement. A hierarchical structure mirroring the female harems of past dynasties, but the most shocking survival was this. Several of her favorite attendants, including Zhang Yuqia and Zhang Chongzong, actually rose to real political power. They advised her, drafted documents, and helped enforce her rule, which only made her court more determined to erase the harem after she was gone. By the Song dynasty, the male harem had faded into rumor. Confucian scholars dismissed it as immoral. Historians called it exaggerated. But the deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Wu Zetian ran the only recorded male imperial harem in Chinese history, and she did it openly. In the end, its legacy is exactly what her enemies feared. It forces us to confront a truth they wanted forgotten. Power is not male. Power is not fixed. And when one woman rewrote the rules of empire, she also rewrote the rules of desire, loyalty, and control. inside the palace walls. Her male harem was not a scandal, it was a symbol, a warning to the world that she, alone, not tradition, decided who held power in her empire.